Confronting humans in combat showed me the real face of fear. Kirith had never known defeat, and neither had any Valorian who walked the halls of the Imperial fleet. The young tactical officer stood at his station aboard the Dominion's Wrath, watching stars blur past the observation windows as the mighty warship cut through the void of space, like a blade through soft flesh. 100 years of conquest had made the Valorian Empire the undisputed masters of the galaxy, and Kirith had grown up hearing tales of victory after victory, world after world falling beneath the banner of his people. He remembered his father telling him stories of the Krethian subjugation, how the four-armed warriors had surrendered within 6 cycles of first contact, their primitive plasma weapons useless against Valorian shields. He remembered learning about the Mindori capitulation in his academy classes, how the telepathic species had begged for mercy after a single demonstration of orbital bombardment. Every species they encountered followed the same pattern: initial resistance, swift defeat, and eventual submission to Valorian rule. It was simply the natural order of things, as inevitable as the rotation of planets around their stars. Tactical Officer Kirith called Fleet Commander Zervan from his elevated command throne, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Present your analysis of the target species." Kirith straightened his uniform and stepped forward, his datapad glowing with information gathered by advanced scouts over the past several months. "The species calls themselves humans." "Fleet Commander," Kirith began, his tone clinical and detached. "They originate from a mid-range terrestrial world in an unremarkable star system on the galaxy's outer spiral arm." He gestured, and holographic images filled the command deck, showing bipedal creatures with soft skin and fragile-looking bodies. "Their technology is approximately 300 years behind our own standards, and they possess no faster-than-light capability beyond crude warp engines that barely allow them to colonize neighboring star systems." Zorvan leaned forward, his scaled face twisting into what passed for a smile among the Valorians. "And their military capabilities?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer would please him. "Minimal." "Fleet Commander," Kirith replied. "Their weapons are projectile-based with some rudimentary energy systems. Their ships lack proper shielding, and their soldiers wear physical armor rather than energy barriers." Laughter rippled through the command deck as officers exchanged amused glances. 3 cycles, Zorvan declared, raising one clawed hand in proclamation. "I give this conquest 3 cycles before we plant our banner on their homeworld and add another species to the Imperial Registry." Kirith returned to his station, feeling the comfortable certainty of inevitable victory settle over him like a warm blanket. He noticed, however, that not everyone shared the command deck's confident mood. Senior Combat Advisor Selith stood near the tactical displays, his weathered face showing none of the amusement that infected the younger officers. The old warrior had fought in more campaigns than anyone else aboard the ship, and his experience had earned him both respect and the occasional accusation of excessive caution. "You seem troubled." "Advisor," Kirith said quietly, stepping closer to the veteran. Selith did not look away from the data scrolling across his screen, his eyes fixed on environmental readings from the human homeworld. "Tell me, young Kirith, what do you see when you look at this world they call Earth?" The advisor Asked Kirith examined the data. Temperature variation spanning over 100 degrees. Atmospheric instability, tectonic activity, radiation levels from their star that would require constant biological adaptation. "I see a harsh world," Kirith admitted, though nothing that explains concern. "A harsh world indeed," Selith murmured. "And yet these soft-bodied creatures did not merely survive there, they conquered it. They became the dominant species on a planet that seems designed to kill everything that walks upon it." Before Kirith could respond, A communications officer interrupted with an announcement that silenced all conversation. Fleet Commander, we are receiving a response to our surrender demand. The main view screen flickered to life, and for the first time, Kirith saw a living human face. The creature on the screen was female, according to their intelligence. With dark hair pulled back and eyes that held a steadiness Kirith found oddly unsettling. She wore a uniform decorated with symbols of rank, and when she spoke, her voice carried no fear, no trembling. Nothing that Kirith expected from a species about to face extinction. This is Captain Yoon Jie of the United Earth Defense Force, she said. We have received your terms of surrender, and we have prepared our response. A pause followed, and Kirith watched the human's expression shift into something that he would later recognize as cold determination. Come and take it, she said simply. The transmission ended. Jorvan burst into laughter, and the sound echoed across the command deck as other officers joined him. Did you hear that? The fleet commander roared with amusement. The prey believes it can threaten the hunter. How delightfully absurd. The laughter continued, spreading through the gathered officers like a contagion of arrogance. Kirith found himself smiling as well, caught up in the shared certainty that this conquest would be no different from all the others. But as the celebration continued, he glanced back toward Selith and felt his smile falter. The old warrior was not laughing. He was staring at the blank view screen where the human captain's face had been. And in his ancient eyes, Kirith saw something he had never witnessed in a Valorian soldier before. He saw doubt. 3 cycles, someone nearby repeated cheerfully. Raising a drinking vessel in premature Toslith finally turned away from the screen, and as he passed Kirith, he spoke in a voice so quiet that no one else could hear. I have fought 17 species across 40 years of service, and I have learned to read the eyes of those who face our fleets. And in those eyes, I have always seen fear. He paused at the doorway, looking back at Kirith with an expression that would haunt the young officer in the terrible days to come. That human did not have fear in her eyes. Young one, she had patience, and patience in prey is something that should terrify any predator. Then he was gone, leaving Kirith standing amid the celebration with the first cold whisper of unease settling into his heart. Confronting humans in combat showed me the real face of fear. The first battle began exactly as Fleet Commander Zorvan had predicted, with Valorian warships sweeping through the outer colonies of human space like fire through dry grass. Kirith watched from his tactical station as human defense stations fell one after another, their primitive shields collapsing under concentrated plasma bombardment within minutes of engagement. Enemy vessels approaching, a sensor officer announced. 12 ships, destroyer class by their configuration, on the main view screen. Kirith could see the human fleet emerging from behind a small moon, their hulls painted in dark colors that seemed to absorb the starlight around them. They were small, barely half the size of Valorian cruisers, and their weapon signatures registered as laughably weak compared to Imperial standards. Destroy them, Zorvan commanded with a dismissive wave of his hand. And try not to waste too much ammunition. The Valorian fleet opened fire, and space itself seemed to burn with the fury of 1,000 plasma cannons. Kirith expected the human ships to scatter, to flee, to do anything that prey typically did when faced with overwhelming force. They did not scatter. Instead, the 12 destroyers accelerated directly into the barrage, weaving through the plasma fire with movements that seemed almost reckless in their aggression. They are not retreating, someone said, confusion evident in their voice. They will, Zorvan replied confidently. All prey runs eventually, but the humans did not run. One of their destroyers took a direct hit that tore through its hull, venting atmosphere and flames into the vacuum of space, and still it kept coming, its remaining weapons firing continuously as it closed the distance. Kirith watched in disbelief as the crippled vessel, burning and dying, adjusted its course, and accelerated directly toward the Valorian cruiser Eternal Victory. "They are going to ram us." The sensor officers screamed. The impact was catastrophic. The human destroyers struck the Eternal Victory amidships, and both vessels vanished in a bloom of fire that lit up the battlefield like a newborn. Star silence fell over the command deck of the Dominions. "Wrath, that pilot was still alive when he hit." "US," someone whispered. The life signs were still reading until the moment of impact. Kirith felt something cold settle into his stomach as he processed what he had just witnessed. A human had chosen to die rather than retreat, had steered their burning ship into an enemy vessel, knowing they would not survive, had traded their own existence for the chance to take Valorians with them. "Continue the attack," Zovan ordered. But his voice had lost us some of its earlier confidence. The battle raged for 6 more hours. When it ended, the Valorian fleet had achieved victory. But the cost was unlike anything Kirith had ever seen in his service records. 4 cruisers destroyed, 11 support vessels crippled, and nearly 3,000 Valorian soldiers dead. The humans had lost their entire defensive fleet, every single ship destroyed. Not one surrendering, not one retreating. Every crew fighting until their vessels were nothing but scattered debris. "Prepare the ground forces," Zorvan commanded as the fleet moved toward a human colony world designated New Sol. "We will remind these creatures what happens to those who resist the Empire." Kirith was assigned to the second wave of ground troops, and as his transport descended through the atmosphere, he tried to prepare himself for his first direct combat against humans. The colony had been bombed from orbit. Its defensive installations reduced to rubble, and scans showed minimal resistance remaining in the primary settlement. It should have been simple cleanup. Nothing more than eliminating scattered survivors too stubborn to accept defeat. Kirith and his squad touched down in what had once been a residential district, their boots crunching on broken glass and shattered stone as they advanced through the ruins. The temperature was far below Valorian comfort levels, cold enough that Kirith could see his breath forming clouds in the air. But humans apparently considered this normal for their settlements. "Movement ahead," his squad leader announced. "One target, possibly injured." They found the human in a collapsed building. A male with blood covering half his face and one arm hanging uselessly at his side. He was wearing the uniform of a soldier, but his weapon was nowhere in sight, and by all reasonable assessment, he posed no threat. "Surrender," the squad leader commanded, "and your death will be quick." The human looked up at them, and Kirith saw the same expression he had seen on Captain Yoon Jihee's face during that first transmission. No fear. The wounded man smiled. Actually smiled, and reached his functional hand towards something on his belt. "See you in hell," he said in broken Valorian, words he must have learned specifically for this moment. The explosion killed 3 members of Kirith's squad instantly. Kirith himself was thrown backward by the blast, his armor absorbing most of the damage, but leaving him stunned and bleeding on the frozen ground. As he lay there, ears ringing and vision blurred, he heard the sounds of battle erupting throughout the colony. Gunfire and screams and explosions marking the death of Valorians who had expected easy victory hours later. When the colony was finally secured at a cost of 200 ground troops, Kirith sat in a medical bay having shrapnel removed from his shoulder. He thought about the human who had killed himself rather than be captured, who had learned enemy words just to deliver a final defiant message, who had smiled as he triggered the explosive that ended his life. That night, Kirith filed his official combat report, using language that no Valorian officer had employed in decades. Recommend reassessment of enemy capabilities. He wrote, "Initial projections may have significantly underestimated human resistance capacity. Advise caution in future engagements." The word he wanted to use was fear, but regulations did not allow such admissions still. As he lay in his quarters trying to find sleep, Kireth could not shake the image of that human soldier's smile. It was the smile of someone who had already accepted death and found peace in taking enemies with them. It was not the expression of prey, it was the expression of something else entirely. Something that Kireth did not yet have words for, but he would learn those words soon enough. Written in the blood of his people across a dozen battlefields, the war had only just begun. Confronting humans in combat showed me the real face of fear. 3 months into the campaign, Kireth began to understand why Seleth had been afraid. The war was not proceeding according to any model the Valorian Empire had ever encountered. And with each passing week, the situation grew more confusing and more costly. Kireth spent his off-duty hours in the ship's archive, pulling every piece of data the scouts had gathered about humanity, desperate to understand what made these creatures so different from every other species the Empire had conquered. What he found changed everything he thought he knew about the galaxy. Earth was not merely a harsh world. It was a death world by any reasonable classification. Temperature extremes alone would have rendered most species extinct within generations, ranging from frozen wastelands where water became solid stone to burning deserts where the air itself could kill. The gravity was brutal. The radiation from their sun was constant, and the planet was covered with predators that had spent millions of years evolving better ways to kill, and yet humans had not merely survived there. They had dominated. Kireth read about creatures called tigers and wolves and sharks, apex predators that humans had hunted to near extinction simply because they wanted to. He learned about something called persistence hunting, where humans would chase prey across vast distances for days without stopping, walking and running until their targets literally collapsed from exhaustion. Days of pursuit without rest, without sleep, following an animal until its heart simply gave out. No Valorian could function for more than 16 hours without mandatory rest cycles, but humans could push themselves for days when motivated, burning through their body's reserves with it. Something they called adrenaline and willpower, perhaps. Most disturbing was what Kireth discovered about human history. And like most species that unified and achieved peace before reaching the stars, humans had spent their entire existence fighting each other. They had developed warfare to an art form, creating weapons and tactics and strategies specifically designed to kill their own kind. Every generation brought new ways to destroy, new methods of death, new technologies born from the simple desire to kill other humans more efficiently. They had split the atom itself and turned it into a weapon, had poisoned entire regions of their planet, had burned cities with fire that fell from the sky. The Valorians were conquerors, yes, but they conquered for resources and expansion and logical gain. Humans killed for ideology, for revenge, for honor, for concepts that existed only in their minds. They were, Kireth realized with growing horror, the most practiced killers in the entire galaxy. You have been studying them, Seleth said one evening, finding Kireth in the archive with data screens surrounding him like walls. I needed to understand, Kireth replied. I needed to know why they fight the way they do. Seleth sat down beside him, his old bones creaking with the movement. And what have you learned, young one? We are not hunting them, Kireth said slowly, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. We never were. We just did not realize it yet. The veteran nodded, his expression carrying the weight of someone who had already reached that terrible conclusion. I have fought 17 species, Seleth said, and every single one of them had a breaking point. A moment where the cost of resistance exceeded the cost of surrender. A point where survival instinct overrode everything else. He turned to look at Kireth directly, and the fear in his eyes was unmistakable now. Humans do not have that point. Or if they do, we have not found it yet, and I am beginning to believe we never will. 2 weeks later, Seleth was dead, The battle happened on a moon called Titan's Rest, where human forces had established a defensive position that threatened Valorian supply lines. Kirith was not present for the engagement, but he read the reports and watched the recorded footage until every detail was burned into his memory. The humans had waited until night fell, using the darkness as a weapon since their eyes adapted to low light far better than Valorian vision. They moved through the shadows like ghosts, silent and patient, striking without warning and vanishing before retaliation could be organized. Said Slith had been leading a patrol when they found him, or rather, when they found him and his killer together. The human soldier was dead, riddled with plasma burns that should have killed him 10 times over. But somehow he had kept fighting long enough to reach Salithi, found the old warrior with the human's hands still wrapped around his throat, both of them lying in the frozen mud, neither of them breathing. The human had been shot 7 times. 7 times. And still, he had found the strength to close the distance and kill one more enemy before his body finally accepted that it was dead. Kirith stood at Selith's memorial service, feeling something he had never experienced before in his military career. He felt like prey. He looked around at his fellow officers, seeing the same dawning realization spreading through the ranks like a disease. They had come to this war expecting conquest, expecting another easy victory to add to the Empire's endless list of triumphs. Instead, they had found something the galaxy had never shown them before. They had found a species that was better at war than they were. They had found the apex predator, and now that predator knew where they lived. "We need to end this quickly," Fleet Commander Zorvan announced at the next strategy meeting. "We need to strike at their homeworld before they can organize a proper counterattack." But even as he spoke, Kirith noticed that the fleet commander's hands were trembling. Arrogance was gone from his voice and had been replaced by something else. Something that smelled like desperation, and somewhere in the darkness of space, the humans were watching and waiting and learning. They were very good at learning. Kirith had discovered it was perhaps their most terrifying trait of all. Confronting humans in combat showed me the real face of fear. 6 months after the invasion began, the war changed in a way that no Valorian had anticipated. The humans stopped defending. They started attacking. Kirith was on the bridge when the first reports came in, his station lighting up with emergency transmissions from outposts across the occupied territories. Supply convoy destroyed in the Karis sector. Number survivors refueling station in the Morrow system offline. All personnel missing. Listening post near the Vale Nebula silent. Last transmission was a human voice saying, "Greetings from Earth." "How is this possible?" Fleet Commander Zorvan demanded, his voice cracking with a strain that had become increasingly common in recent weeks. "They had no fleet. We destroyed everything they had." But the humans had learned, had adapted, had taken the wreckage of their destroyed ships and combined it with captured Valorian technology to build something new. Intelligence reports showed human vessels that moved faster than they should, hit harder than they should, appeared and disappeared like phantoms in the endless dark of space. Captain Yunji was behind many of the attacks. Her tactical brilliance turning every engagement into a nightmare for Valorian commanders. She never attacked where they were strong, never engaged in battles she could not win, always struck at the weak points and vulnerable moments with precision that seemed almost supernatural. "She studies us," Kirith realized during one strategy session. "She learns our patrol patterns, our supply schedules, our communication protocols, and then she uses that knowledge to hurt us in ways we cannot predict." It was what humans had always done, what they had spent their entire evolutionary history perfecting. They watched, they waited, they learned, and then they killed. The boarding action happened 3 weeks. Kirith was sleeping when the alarms began screaming, was still pulling on his uniform when the first explosions rocked the ship, was running toward his battle station when he saw them for the first time up up-close human soldiers, their faces hidden behind dark helmets. Their bodies wrapped in armor that blended Valorian shield technology with their own brutal designs. They moved through the corridors with terrifying efficiency, each one covering the others, advancing like a single organism with multiple bodies. Kirith raised his weapon and fired, watching his plasma bolt strike a human marine directly in the chest. The human staggered but did not fall instead. The marine looked down at the smoking hole in their armor, looked up at Kirith, and kept coming. It should have been impossible. The damage should have been fatal. But the human crossed the remaining distance in 3 massive strides and slammed into Kirith with force that sent both of them crashing into the barriers. While they fought in the corridor, Kirith using every combat technique he had ever learned while the humans simply refused to die, continued attacking with fists and elbows and teeth, even as blood poured from wounds that would have incapacitated any Valorian later. Kirith would learn about human adrenaline, about the chemical that flooded their bodies in moments of danger and temporarily shut off pain receptors, allowing them to function through injuries that should have been debilitating in that moment. All he knew was that he was fighting something that would not stop, could not be stopped, something that had decided he was going to die and was simply waiting for his body to accept that fact. Survived only because reinforcements arrived. Because 3 other Valorians joined the fight, and together they finally brought the human down. Even then, the Marine kept trying to crawl forward, kept reaching for weapons, kept fighting until the blood loss finally exceeded what even human biology could compensate for. Kirith sat against the corridor wall afterward, staring at the body of his attacker, trying to process what he had experienced. The human had been smiling behind their helmet. He had seen it when the faceplate cracked, had seen the expression on the dying Marine's face. It was the same smile that Suicide Bomber had worn on New Soul, the smile of someone who had already accepted death and found joy in taking enemies with them. The battle for the Dominion's wrath lasted 4 hours. When it was over, the humans retreated with stolen data cores and 3 captured officers, leaving behind 47 dead Marines and nearly 200 dead Valorians. It was not a victory for either side, but it proved something that Kirith could no longer deny. The humans were not trying to survive anymore. They were hunting that night. A transmission reached every ship in the Valorian fleet, broadcast on frequencies that should have been secure. A human voice, speaking Valorian with an accent that was almost perfect, delivered a message that consisted of only 2 words: "We're coming." Lieutenant Kim Soo-jin led the next attack, her fighter squadron dancing through Valorian defensive fire with movements that seemed to defy physics. Kirith watched the engagement footage later, studying the way human pilots reacted to threats, and realized that their response times were faster than any species he had ever encountered. Valorians needed nearly a full second to process visual information and translate it into physical action. Humans could do it in a fraction of that time. They could see danger and respond before a Valorian had even finished recognizing the threat. Evolution had built them for combat, had spent millions of years refining their reflexes on a world where slow reactions meant death. "They are coming for the home world," Fleet Commander Zorvan announced, his voice hollow. "Intelligence confirms human fleet movements toward the core systems." Kirith looked around the command deck at his fellow officers, seeing the same terrible understanding in every face. The hunters had become the hunted, and the prey had very sharp teeth. Confronting humans in combat showed me the real face of fear. The Valorian homeworld hung in space like a jewel, its purple oceans and green continents visible from orbit as the battered remnants of the Imperial fleet gathered for a final stand. Kirith stood at his station aboard what remained of the Dominion's wrath, watching sensor displays track the approaching human armada. 8 months ago, humanity had been considered a primitive species barely worth conquering. Now, they were coming to end the Valorian Empire, All ships report ready, a communications officer announced, their voice carrying the resignation of someone who had already accepted defeat. Fleet Commander Zorvan sat in his command throne. But the arrogant conqueror who had laughed at human defiance was gone. In his place was a broken commander, haunted by the deaths of thousands under his leadership, facing the consequences of underestimating prey that had never been prey at all. "We fight for our homes," Zorvan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We fight for our families. We fight because there is nothing else left to do." The human fleet emerged from faster-than-light transit, like predators materializing from shadow. Their ships, a hybrid nightmare of captured Valorian technology and human engineering, they were outnumbered. The Imperial fleet still possessed more vessels despite the losses of recent months. But numbers had long since stopped mattering in this war. Captain Yoon Ji-hee's voice came across the communication channels, broadcast to every Valorian ship in the system. "This is the United Earth Defense Force," she said. "You invaded our worlds, killed our people, and declared us prey to be conquered. We are here to show you how wrong you were. But we are also here to offer you a choice." Zorvan laughed, though the sound held no humor. "A choice?" He repeated. "You come to destroy us and speak of choices?" "We come to end this war," Ji-hee replied. "How it ends is up to you. Surrender now. Accept responsibility for your crimes, and your people will live. Fight us, and we will do what humans have always done to those who threaten our existence." For a long moment, silence hung over the command deck. Then Zorvan stood from his throne, his scales flushing with rage and humiliation. "We are the Valorian Empire," he declared. "We do not surrender to primitives. All ships, attack." The final battle began. Kirith had witnessed combat before, had seen the violence that humans brought to warfare. But nothing had prepared him for the apocalypse that unfolded above his homeworld. Human ships moved with coordinated precision that made Valorian formations look clumsy by comparison, their tactics shifting and adapting in real time as if the entire fleet shared a single, brilliant mind. The Dominion's wrath shuddered under impact after impact, its shields failing, its hull breaching, its crew dying at their station. Skyrith watched the tactical display as ship after ship went dark, as the Imperial fleet crumbled against human aggression and human adaptability and human refusal to accept defeat. When the boarding parties arrived, Kirith did not fight. He watched the human Marines sweep through the corridors, efficient and lethal, and he simply waited at his station for whatever would come next. They found him there when the ship was secured, hands raised in surrender, eyes fixed on the destruction visible through the shattered observation windows. Hours later, Kirith stood in a makeshift detention area with the surviving command staff, waiting for execution. It was what the Empire would have done to captured enemy commanders, what any reasonable species would do to those who had invaded their worlds and killed their people. But when Captain Yoon Ji-hee entered the room, she did not give the order to kill them. Instead, she looked at the gathered Valorians with an expression that Kirith struggled to interpret. It was not hatred. Though she had every reason to hate them, it was not triumph. Though she had certainly earned the right to celebrate, it was something else. Something that looked almost like exhaustion mixed with determination. "Fleet Commander Zorvan," she said, "you are under arrest for crimes against humanity. You will face trial, and if found guilty, you will face justice. But this war is over." Zorvan stared at her, confusion evident in his posture. "You are not going to kill us?" he asked. "No," Ji-hee replied. "But we invaded your worlds. We killed your people. We declared you animals to be hunted. Why would you show us mercy?" Ji-hee was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke, her words carved themselves into Kirith's memory forever. "Because we can," she said. "Because choosing not to become monsters is the hardest fight humans ever face, and we do not intend to lose that fight. Not today, not ever." She turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. Humans are very good at war, she said. We have had endless practice killing each other. We know exactly how to destroy, how to burn, how to make entire civilizations disappear. But we also know what happens when destruction becomes the only answer. We have seen where that path leads. Her eyes met Kyrith's directly, and he saw in them the weight of everything humanity had suffered and survived and overcome. The measure of a species is not what they can destroy, she finished. It is what they choose not to destroy when they have every right to do so. Remember that years past at Kyrith eventually became a liaison between the reformed Valorian government and the United Earth Alliance, helping to build something new from the ashes of conquest and war. He often thought about Jihi's words, often reflected on what he had learned about humanity during those terrible months of conflict. One day, a young Valorian student asked him to describe humans, to explain what made them so dangerous, to help her understand why the mighty empire had fallen to creatures that seemed so fragile. Kyrith considered the question carefully before answering. They are the most dangerous species in the galaxy, he said. Not because of their strength, though they are strong. Not because of their intelligence, though they are clever. Not even because of their adaptability, though they learn faster than any species I have ever encountered. Then why? The student Kyrith remembered Captain Yoonjie standing in that detention room. Remembered the mercy she had chosen when revenge would have been so much easier. Remembered the restraint of predators who could have destroyed everything and simply decided not to. They are dangerous because they choose, he said. They can become monsters when necessary, can unleash destruction that defies imagination, can fight and kill with a ferocity that terrifies every species that has faced them. He paused, ensuring the student understood the weight of what he was about to say. But they choose not to. They fight their own nature, struggle against their own darkness. And most of the time, they win that battle. And that is what makes them terrifying. The student looked confused. How is mercy terrifying? Kyrith smiled, though the expression held no joy. Because mercy from a human is a gift, he answered. And gifts can be revoked. Every moment of peace, every act of kindness, every gesture of forgiveness exists because humans choose to give it, and somewhere in the back of their minds, they remember exactly how to take it all away. He turned to look out the window at the stars, at the galaxy that humans had proven they could conquer if they wished. That is the real face of fear, he said quietly. Not the violence they can inflict, but the violence they hold back. Waiting, patient, ready, always ready.